Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Am I coming loud and clear?
I wouldn't say loud and clear, but you're coming.
Okay. Order. So, give more level. How is it now? Hello, hello. Push it up a bit, James. Push it up a notch. Yeah, right there. Push. Testing 1, 2. Yes, this is Monday morning. We are on a Monday morning.
What is the yellow one control?
We're coming out the left into that box.
So
The other one matches.
Okay, so yellow would
Push.
go into the box.
push a bit more. Push a bit more.
Are you getting too much?
There's a noise floor there. You got to.
Are you hitting that noise floor?
I can hear the noise floor.
Okay. How many mics do you have open? Okay, that's good. That's clear for me. Test 1, 2.
The yellow. The
Yes.
yellow only
Test
affects the box. Is that correct?
Yeah, the outcome. Test 1, 2. Okay, we're good.
I mean, you can come even more and then you can bring down a little
Yeah,
bit.
exactly.
There's
No noise. Yeah.
That's what you keep counting.
Okay, so this is Monday morning. I didn't have breakfast yet. Hello, hello. Test 1, 2. We need the house. Okay, right there. Too much.
All right.
Right there. But let me go closer to the speakers. Test 1, 2. 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 Yeah. Okay. So who's gonna put the mic on him? I'll do it. I'll ask him to do it. Okay.
Before. Thanks.
Morning.
Oh, you know, on that video, the audio will have to be panned left on the output.
That's fine. Yeah, don't worry about it.
I believe it is. I'll just double check it once I got this set.
Okay. What is the Zoom? Do you have the Zoom?
Right here.
Okay, so let's do it because we got a bit behind here.
Oh, yeah.
Now I hear it.
Test 1, 2. Okay. James. Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Yeah, I'm good. Yes. Hello. Testing 1, 2. Great. Okay, let's be.
some empty seats over here. Please take a seat.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Stephen Solomon, the Director of the Business and Economic Reporting Program at the Arthur Carter Journalism Institute here at NYU. And I'm delighted to welcome all of you and also our special guest for this morning. The Right Honourable John Bercow was elected Speaker of the UK House of Commons in 2009, and he was unanimously re-elected in 2017. He is the longest-serving Speaker since the Second World War. Known for his quick wit, Mr. Speaker has championed the rights of backbenchers to bring government ministers to account on the pressing issues of the day. His attempts to modernize Parliament included the removal of a pistol shooting gallery, yes, and the creation of a workplace nursery for the use of members of Parliament and staff. At the time, he commented, there were plenty of places to drink beer, but nowhere to put a baby. He is a passionate supporter of LGBT rights and has made concerted efforts to make Parliament more diverse and representative of the nation. With the appointment of the first Sergeant-at-Arms, Commons chaplain, and senior lawyer from Black, Asian, and ethnic minority backgrounds. Mr. Speaker graduated from the University of Essex in 1985 with a first-class honors degree in government. He is a former national chairman of the Federation of Conservative Students and served as London Borough Councillor. In 1997, he was elected the Conservative Member of Parliament of Buckingham and served as spokesman for education and employment and home affairs. In his spare time, he enjoys attending Arsenal home games, as well as watching and playing tennis. And yes, let's not forget Brexit. Prime Minister Boris Johnson's plan to take Britain out of the European Union without an agreed-upon deal is consuming all the political oxygen in the country. When a prime minister announced that he would suspend Parliament, Mr. Speaker called it a constitutional outrage. Last week, he challenged the Prime Minister in dramatic terms, saying, the only form of Brexit that we have, whenever that might be, will be a Brexit that the House of Commons has explicitly endorsed. His battle with the Prime Minister is taking place before Mr. Speaker's planned retirement at the end of October. In the meantime, many Americans know him as a recent subject of a Stephen Colbert monologue.
Great Britain is always ahead of us with stuff like this. They elected a woman head of state in 1979, and we didn't do that until possibly someday. And standing up to a no-deal Brexit isn't the only way that I'm jealous of the British. Here's the Speaker of the House of Commons calling for order during yesterday's debate. Great Britain is always ahead of us with stuff like this. They elected a woman head of state.
Order! Very rude for members. Order! 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 I say to the Chancellor of the Duchy that when he turns up at our children's school as a parent, he's a very well-behaved fellow. He wouldn't dare behave like that in front of Colin Hall, and neither would I. Don't gesticulate, don't rant, spare us the theatrics, behave yourself, be a good boy, young man, be a good boy.
Why can't we? Why did we ever rebel against them? Just think of how our lawmakers could sound instead of, this appropriations bill will undermine our already dangerously neglected infrastructure. We could have, order! 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 Now don't be daft about this proposal, you tollywogging git, or I'll tell your grandmum what I really think about her jammy squares. Now, be a good boy, Donald. Be a good boy. Go squatty on the potty. We've got a great show for you tonight. Joseph R. Biden is here.
Mr. Speaker, welcome.
Well, Stephen, thank you, and thank you, students, graduate students, faculty, those interested in the public policy process and attempted resolution of political issues in Westminster. Thank you for turning up. Thank you for turning up in large numbers. And thank you for turning up, doubtless, in an interrogative spirit. I am moved to observe, on the strength of what I regard as a distinctively New York welcome, that having heard myself introduced, I can hardly wait to hear myself speak. Whether you'll feel the same way, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of my remarks is open to legitimate speculation and conjecture, but perhaps I can just inquire, being something of a different and naturally shy, self-effacing, retiring soul, whether in fact you can hear me at the back. And our friend at the front is anxious not whether you can hear me at the back or not. He is anxious, I think, about the record, that is to say, the recording. But can I just ask you, can you hear me at the back? Well, I thank you for that answer and for the apparent enthusiasm with which it has been advanced. And I would say to you, sir, in the distinctive, moderately understated shirt, that your answer represents a significant improvement on the last time that I posed that self-same question to people at the back of the room, can you hear me at the back, in which some unhelpful wag replied, yes, but I'll happily change places with someone who can't. So the fact that you can hear me and appear to be not entirely distraught that you can do so, I take as a modest encouragement. Let me say two things at the outset. First, it's a joy to come to New York University, in my case, for the first time. Now, you may think, well, John's just paying obeisance to the courtesies, protocol dictates, good form, good behavior, good fellowship, that he says something positive about his hosts. Well, doubtless that is true, but the reason why I'm pleased to be here is that this is a great institution. From that founding vision of Albert Gallatin 188 years ago to where you are today, you started with 158 students. And today, as I understand it, measured across the different degree awarding sites, New York, Abu Dhabi, and Shanghai, you have 50,000 students, including a sprinkling, in fact more than a sprinkling, of very go-getting, inquisitive, pugnacious, and in many cases rather cerebral master's students in journalism with whom I've just had a half an hour interaction. And I just think that there is a buzz, there's a vibrancy, there's a dynamism about this place, and I think Stephen can take enormous pride in the journalism discipline. And more widely, you can be thrilled that, consistent with that founding vision, the university is non-denominational, it's broad-based, it is utterly, resolutely, and successfully committed to greater and greater and greater diversity and inclusion. And that speaks to your values, to the values of the founders of the university, and frankly, for what it's worth, to my values as well. This is an institution which is racing ahead, not only in terms of investment in research, but in terms of the makeup of the student body. Far more students from minority communities than in the past, far more female students than in the past, and far more from middle and low-income backgrounds. And when you consider the 3,000 institutions across the country, to be one of 60 that's a member of the Association of American Universities, I think speaks to the esteem in which the institution is held. So that's the first reason why I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and I wanted to mention it before I further proceed. Secondly, I am conscious that there is one quite sensitive matter which your natural courtesy might disincline you to raise with me directly, but which, if unaddressed, will lurk mischievously and perhaps from my vantage point perilously in the undergrowth, and which I conclude, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, must be knocked on the head at the outset before I further proceed, and that is the delicate and sensitive matter of height. Very specifically, it has been bruited in some of the more down-market parts of the press that I am, in fact, the shortest man ever to be Speaker of the UK House of Commons. Let me say to you with all the force and rhetorical insistence at my command that there is nothing wrong with being short. We short people, I say to the appropriate members of the audience, must stick together. We may be short, but we may also be and judge ourselves to be perfectly formed. We're environmentally friendly. We don't take up a great deal of space. In any case, I guess I'm making a virtue of necessity because I have always been short. I am now 56 years old and I remain short, and given the known impact of the aging process upon physiognomy, the overwhelming likelihood is that I shall become inexorably and irrevocably shorter still. And about the fact of that continued and soon to be exacerbated shortness, I am as intensely relaxed as the British Blairite Svengali Peter Mandelson once famously said that New Labour in the UK was intensely relaxed about people getting filthy rich. But I'm not intensely relaxed about the matter of historical accuracy. You'd expect the Speaker, forsooth, to have done his research. If in no other respect, at least I hope in that respect, I shall not disappoint you. I have done, and it's quite wrong when some of these scribblers say, oh, well, John Bercow is the shortest man ever to be UK Speaker. Sir John Bussey, Speaker of the UK House of Commons, from 1394 to 1398, Sir John Wenlock, Speaker 1455 to 1456, and Sir Thomas Tresham, Speaker in 1459, are all believed to have been shorter than I am. Although I do have to admit that this was true only after all three of them had been beheaded. Indeed, no fewer than 7 of my predecessors met their end on the executioner's block. One was killed in battle, and a further poor unfortunate soul was brutally murdered. So you will understand, ladies and gentlemen, that this does enable me to view the woes and challenges which afflict and confront the House of Commons, and which in all candour periodically afflict and confront me personally, with an appropriate sense of historical perspective. That is to say, whatever else happens to me, I am not likely to lose my head, though it is possible there will be some competition in the queue on the part of those who would wish to do the deed. I am delighted to be with you, and what I would like to do, if I may, is to speak to 3 points. First, the role of the Speaker in the chair, day to day. What are the modalities of how the Speaker operates? Well, it is quite important to say that in our system in the UK, unlike in the United States, the Speaker is not a player on the pitch. The Speaker is the referee or umpire of the game or match. As Speaker, my job is to keep order, encourage people to take part, and to try to cut down on the number of people excluded altogether as a result of bad behaviour. So I chair debates, I chair the delivery of ministerial statements, I chair prime ministerial and other question times, and I am also making judgments about new clauses to bills and amendments upon which the House should have the opportunity to vote after debate, on the basis that there isn't infinite time available. The power is vested in the chair to try to ensure that the House gets to debate that which the House wants to debate, and on an appropriate and representative range of matters of interest and concern to parliamentarians, colleagues should have the opportunity to vote. The prerequisite of the efficient and effective and fair-minded discharge of the responsibility of the chair as referee or umpire is, first, that the Speaker should know who everybody is. I have to know the names of my 649 other colleagues. I have to know which party they represent, for which constituencies they sit in the House of Commons, and on key issues, to wit, Brexit as a good example, or Israel-Palestine. I'm expected to know from what vantage point a colleague is approaching the subject. Not because I'm seeking to censor, but because it's my challenge to facilitate the fullest and fairest expression of opinion which exists in the House, subject to the caveat and constraint of time. Can I please, everybody, oh, come. What are those pigs I see flying in front of my very eyes? It's completely impossible to satisfy everybody, but if you can keep most people happy most of the time, you are probably doing as much as can reasonably be expected for you to do. That is the first and best known function of the Speaker in the chair, the Speaker as umpire, the Speaker as referee, the Speaker as person who tries either to maintain or, where it's lost, to restore order. In recent times, there has, however, been an appetite for reform in the House, perhaps not insatiable, but nevertheless considerable. And when I stood for election against 9 other candidates in 2009, there was an atmosphere that said this place needs to change. Specifically, my thesis was we need to change in order to restore the balance in and the democratic equilibrium of our institutions. Specifically, I felt, and I said very publicly back in June 2009, for decades under governments of both colours, it's not a party political point, the power of government has increased, is increasing, and needs to be checked. Of which, my friends, the corollary is that the power of Parliament had decreased, was continuing to decrease, and needed to be increased. And so I set out from day one to try to give the House, members of the House individually and the House institutionally, the chance more effectively and remorselessly to question, to probe, to scrutinise, to challenge, to contradict, and where appropriate and necessary to expose the errors of omission and of commission of the government of the day. I started by speeding up question time, which tended to be rather slow. Lots of people had given up hope of getting in to ask their questions, so they would go and write a blog or do a radio interview or turn up in a television studio. And I felt that the life was being sapped out of the chamber of the legislature. And so I resolved, well, we've got to speed up. I also said to colleagues, I think matters that are urgent, but which the government of the day, in the first instance Labour, and then subsequently Conservative Lib Dem, and then Conservative, matters which the government don't want to be addressed, but which other colleagues think are urgent, should have the opportunity to be effectively aired in the House through urgent, capital U, questions, capital Q. The UQ had fallen into desuetude over quite a period, and in campaigning to be elected, I said, if you elect me, I will do my best to facilitate a renaissance of the urgent question. Under the standing orders, a member has to apply to the Speaker for permission to put an urgent question, and if the Speaker grants it, that is not, for the avoidance of doubt, the Speaker saying the government's wrong on the issue, any more than it's the Speaker saying the House is wrong and the government is right on the issue. It's simply the Speaker saying this is a matter that warrants the attention of the House of Commons today for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes, maybe an hour. In the year before I was elected Speaker, we had 2 urgent questions all year. That was during the period of the global financial crisis, so it's reasonable to assume there might have been matters that could legitimately be aired, but it wasn't happening. There was a sloth and a lack of interrogative opportunity in the chamber. In the last 10 years, I have granted 658 urgent questions, which means that members can come and probe, and ministers are held to account. Ministerial feet are held to the fire. In the Labour government, Jack Straw, who has previously served as Home Secretary and Foreign Secretary, but at that point in 2009 was the Secretary of State for Justice, never complained if I granted an urgent question to him because he respected Parliament. In the current government, I just give one example, the Minister for the Cabinet Office and the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, whom I was gently berating for his boisterous sedentary chuntering, is an exceptional parliamentary performer. He's bright, he's quick, he's adroit, he's dexterous, he's articulate. He's never complained, Michael Gove, when I've granted urgent questions to him, because he knows it's his duty to be there and to hack it, to respond, to do his best, to perform to maximum advantage and to that of his government. But frankly, whether ministers complain or not, the chair's duty is to grant those questions if the chair judges that the matter is urgent and should be addressed. That's the biggest change in the chamber. More recently, we've had SO24 debates. I won't bore you with the detail of SO24, but SO24 is a standing order that allows emergency debates on issues. The recent challenge has been that we have a minority government in the United Kingdom, headed by Prime Minister Johnson, and there is a large body of people, therefore, who are not part of or sympathetic to that government, whose views must also be heard. And in a number of cases recently, colleagues have applied for permission to hold a debate under Standing Order 24 in 2 cases in the last 6 months with a view to bagging, to securing, to gaining with the approval of the democratic vote of the House, parliamentary time, ladies and gentlemen, to bring forward legislation, in each case relating to Brexit. The most recent of those occasions was 10 days ago, and there is now a bill, the so-called Hillary Benn, Oliver Letwin bill, on the statute book, which is intended to prevent a no-deal Brexit from the Union before the 31st of October. Whether that bill's the right bill or not is a matter of opinion. Whether we leave the European Union or not is a matter of opinion. Whether we leave the European Union or not with a deal or without a deal is a matter of opinion. As Speaker, all I have been seeking to do is to facilitate the desire of the House of Commons, of which, as Speaker, I am the chair, saying to colleagues, if this is what you want, this is orderly, this can happen, over to you. Outside of the chamber, as Stephen rightly observed, I've been focused on trying to make the place a more modern workplace by having a nursery rather than a shooting gallery, by having a digital, high-tech, cutting-edge, state-of-the-art interactive education centre, and I was influenced in part in my mission to secure that facility, which now exists, by knowledge of what exists in the United States. I said to colleagues in America, they've got a wonderful visitor centre in Washington. We're a very old and established parliament, but we don't actually have anything analogous to or on the scale of theirs. And it seemed rather odd. We finally got the Education Centre in 2015, and it was a curious irony, my friends, that that facility was opened in 2015 in the year that we marked the 800th anniversary of the signing of the Magna Carta and the 750th anniversary of the first recognisably English Parliament. So we Brits cannot be accused of excessive haste in these important matters. What I was motivated by was a desire that there should be a facility that thousands upon thousands upon thousands of young people could visit. One of the newspapers at the time, I can't remember which off the top of my head, but which wasn't terribly attentive to the detail of the issue or very familiar with the, if I can put it this way, political or intellectual case for the establishment of such a facility, reacted as it would tend to do in personal terms, and sort of said it was Bercow's folly. I mean, that was the level of the argument. It was Bercow's folly, because £7 million of taxpayers' money was going to be blown on such a facility. Well, it depends whether you think you're blowing public money in constructing a facility that speaks to the evolution of the institution, the way Parliament operates, the story of how we became the modern democracy we are, for the benefit of generations of young people. I don't know about you, ladies and gentlemen, I don't call that blowing public money. I call that trying to help the future citizens of our country know better how we came to be what we are, the way in which we operate, and by what means they can interact with the place. So I'm very proud of that, as I am of trying to broker greater diversity. I did appoint the first female and BAME Speaker's chaplain in the history of the House of Commons, the Right Reverend Rose Hudson Wilkin, who is now a national figure in the United Kingdom and the most empathetic chaplain any parliament could want. I did appoint the first BAME Sergeant-at-Arms in the history of the House, Mohammed Al-Haji, and I did appoint the first female and BAME Speaker's Counsel, senior lawyer in the House, Sarah Salimi, in the history of the House. And I have used consultants and experts in the field to make the place look a little more like the country that we are obliged to represent. I make absolutely no apology for that whatsoever, any more than I make any apology to anyone, anywhere, at any time, for trying to strengthen, to embolden, and to protect the interests of an enhanced legislature which holds the executive branch to account. My final point is this. I try to get out and about and to talk in schools and colleges and universities and to faith groups, voluntary bodies, public institutions of one type or another, about the House of Commons, so that people understand what we do and why it matters and in what way we're changing, which they won't necessarily read about through mainstream sources, and by what means they can interact with the legislative process. And I do often talk about issues of order and disorder. I have regularly admitted that probably the noisiest member of the House of Commons is a very congenial and amiable fellow called Carl Turner, who's the honourable gentleman, the member for Kingston upon Hull East in Yorkshire. Now, Carl is a Labour member. He's a lawyer. He's what you'd call an attorney. He's a barrister by background. He's actually a very likeable guy, but he goes from 0 to 60 in about 5 seconds, and he yells out at the government, "Shocking! It's a disgrace!" And then he'll point at a minister, gesticulating, and say, "Behave!" whilst conspicuously failing to do so himself. So obviously I've had to take him to task over the years, though he's usually very good-natured about accepting the rebuke. I will say something to him to the effect that, frankly, you know, he's a very eccentric denizen of the House. He needs to go and lie down in a dark room and take some sort of soothing medicament, and he'll probably feel better at the end of it. He tends to come up afterwards and say, "Mr. Speaker, I do apologise. I knew that I was in for a bollocking." I try to explain to people how the whip system operates. In a modern parliamentary democracy where you've got big parties, you, of course, have to have both organisational infrastructure and some power of discipline in political parties, because people are elected not just on their own account as individuals, but in their capacity as members of parties. But on the other hand, the public, I don't know if you see this in the US, certainly in the UK, have an increasing appetite for that parliamentarian who sometimes breaks free from the party mould. The Speaker, of course, is independent of, unconnected with, owing no allegiance to and expressing no support for any political party. But party MPs mainly support their party. The interesting point is where they detach themselves from party because of a strong core conviction or principle. And my sense is that that is popular. But it does, of course, mean upsetting the whips. Well, you know, when I was a backbencher before I became Speaker, and when I was a shadow minister, you know, I wasn't very good at it. I wasn't very good at sticking to a collective hymn sheet. Indeed, I always had a relationship with my whips characterised by trust and understanding. I didn't trust them, and they didn't understand me. And so I have considerable respect for those who, sometimes at considerable personal cost, in terms of exposure to ad hominem abuse and threats and intimidation, or simply being sent to Coventry by their colleagues, stand up and say, "Sorry, I generally support my party, but I disagree on this issue, and I'm going to speak up for what I believe." Surely, in representative democratic institutions, that's what we want to see. We are electing not robots, not buttons to be pressed. We are electing people charged to exercise their judgment. And this is a point I regularly make when I speak across the country and more widely. Finally, I've always wanted to welcome the UK Youth Parliament, and I've welcomed them every year to Westminster for their debates on a non-sitting Friday for the last decade. And every year I've gone to the UK Youth Parliament annual conference to speak to them. Now, why do I do that? Well, of course I do it because I'm a politician and I enjoy public communication. And I enjoy talking to and hearing from people. But I also go Stephen, ladies and gentlemen, because I think that if we in politics want ever again to be respected by young people, we have to show respect for young people. Respect is not our automatic right. It is an earned credit, or if you will, a two-way street. So that's why I go about it the way I do. Inevitably, when you do a job and you do it in a forceful way and you take positions on issues that require the exercise of judgment rather than just sitting on the fence, there will be people who say 3 cheers, we agree with that. I was just coming out of my hotel this morning and a couple of British guys came up to me and said, you know, we are on holiday here, we strongly support you, can we have a picture, etc., etc. And there will be other people who disagree. That is life. I have done my best, but I think after a decade, by the end of October, it's time to pass the baton to somebody else and to try to move off and find another way in which to occupy my time. I hope it doesn't sound mawkish when I conclude what is the most enormous privilege for me to speak to you when I say this. I have no plans to die tomorrow. But if I were to die tomorrow, I would die happy, feeling I've been enormously lucky and privileged to do what I have done for 22 years as a Member of Parliament representing the Buckingham constituency in the UK, and for the last 10 as Speaker. If you jump out of bed in the morning and look forward to the day ahead, frankly, you are blessed. That has been my privilege and honour for over 2 decades, and I count myself very fortunate. It's what I would want for everybody else, including all of you who've been generous, tolerant, and forbearing enough not only to turn up and listen to me, but to persist throughout without apparently falling asleep. Thank you very much indeed. And over to them, really.
Well, we'd like to take questions now. Would you like to call in whoever is there?
May I start with the young woman here, please, if I may? Is that all right, Steve?
Hi, I wanted to switch, of course, to the topic of Brexit, and I wanted to ask you about the secret documents that the government was forced to publish last week outlining the effects of a no deal. So I was just wondering, by making that information so publicly available, do you think that in any way changes the calculation of Prime Minister Johnson about proceeding with a no deal, if that's the case, and does it change the willingness of MPs to accept a no deal?
I think the Prime Minister will do whatever he thinks is right for the country, and will make a calculation also about his best chance of support, as any politician would do. If you're asking me, do I think that there is any reason to suppose that that calculation will have been changed by the fact of documents disclosed, I'm not aware of that. I think he will just make a fair-minded judgment in his own terms, knowing what his colleagues think, knowing what Parliament thinks, as to what he should do. As to whether Parliament, is more likely to take a different view than it's already taken, it's very difficult to predict. I'm not aware of that. I simply repeat the point I've made all along. 2 points. First, that debate, that emergency debate on the basis of the prorogation of Parliament and what documents showed about government thinking was a legitimate debate. It's not for me to say the government is right in relation to those documents or wrong. I've expressed a view about the prorogation of Parliament and the circumstances in which it took place, but I'm not adding to that. As to those documents, it's not for me really to take sides on that. The government will argue its case, indeed in the court, starting tomorrow in the Supreme Court, and people who take the opposite view to the government will argue against it. The matter was proper to be aired in the chamber. It may not have been popular with everybody, but I had a sense, ladies and gentlemen, that the House wanted to debate that matter. And therefore, when the application was made to me, I said, yes, this should be debated. It was obvious by the very large number of colleagues who stood up to signal their desire for that debate to be held that I was acting in conformity with the will of the House in facilitating that debate. in terms of the future, I stand by, I'm sorry if it's a bit prosaic and unimaginative from your point of view, but I stand by this proposition. There are three ways to proceed in relation to Brexit. Leave with a deal, leave by resolution of Parliament with no deal, or put the matter back into the melting pot. And I say, just in case there is any lurking cynic who is not of your number, who is thinking of penning something about this appearance, I say for the avoidance of doubt, in terms that are of crystal clarity and which brook of no legitimate misunderstanding, so I hope an individual concerned will get the point, I am not arguing for one course of action in this circumstance as against another. What I am arguing is that in a parliamentary democracy, Parliament cannot be ejected from the centre stage of the attempted dispute resolution process and the pursuit of closure on the matter of Brexit. All I'm saying is we're a parliamentary democracy, there will be different opinions, there will be members of the public with different opinions, there will be media outlets with different opinions to which they are entitled, but no force on earth, as far as I'm concerned, is going to stop Parliament in a parliamentary democracy deciding what course it wishes to chart. Indeed, I think that this point is so obvious and so plain and so manifest that only either an extraordinarily sophisticated person or someone determined to misunderstand and misrepresent could possibly fail to grasp it. Please, sir.
Do you think a no-deal Brexit is still possible, and is it a bad idea?
Forgive me.
Do you think a no-deal Brexit is still possible, and is it a bad idea for the UK?
Is it what, sorry?
A bad idea, a bad solution for the UK.
I'm not arguing for that, and I'm not arguing against it. Forgive me, I was trying to make the point that it is up to Parliament to decide. I mean, you know, I voted in the referendum. That's a matter of historical fact. I don't need to dwell on that. I'm a citizen. I had a right to vote, and I voted on the matter. As to which is the best course, I genuinely think I've just got to leave that to Parliament. In the future, our relations with our European friends and neighbours will be very important. We live in an interdependent world, so what happens, you know, good ties, economic cooperation, security cooperation, cultural cooperation will be very important. Is a no-deal Brexit before the 31st of October possible? Well, not unless Parliament changes the law. Not unless Parliament changes the law. I cannot see that happening unless Parliament changes the law, and I'm not expecting that to happen. But other people may have a different view. Can I just take another female inquisitor, and then I will come to you? Of course, please.
Hi. So I'm sure a lot of these questions are going to be about Brexit. I think that you've emphasized a bit the role you play as a referee. And I'm actually more curious about it. You did talk about it at length, but I'm curious about where there are some less obvious tricks that you've learned over the course of 10 years in order to keep debate on track as you understood it to be. Specifically, when it comes to Brexit, if you want to focus on that example, what were moments where, in your position as referee, you felt a need to enter or control the debate so that it arrived at a kind of more specific or targeted question?
Well, I think that there were periods in relation to some of the Brexit legislation when I felt that there were amendments tabled that made the case, for example, for continued membership of a customs union or of the single market, which needed to be put to the House. I mean, that is just one example. I think that there was a big battle, and this is perhaps a bigger example, on the part of members of the House to secure, ladies and gentlemen, for themselves and for the institution, the right to a vote on a Brexit deal, because that wasn't originally proposed by the government. It was intended that if the government got a deal, it would simply inform the House of that deal. But there was a very considerable appetite or thirst across the House for colleagues to be able either to approve or to disapprove the deal. So where there were amendments that asked for that, I granted them. Now, was that because I was trying to disadvantage the government in any way? No, I was trying to advantage the House. You can always look at a thing positively or negatively. And the way I look at it is, if there are significant numbers of people who want to put an alternative proposition to that which is contained in the executive's bill, and if there is reason to think that it is a significant issue in the debate, let it be aired and let it be voted upon. And on one occasion, I know there was a procedural amendment last year, which I thought was orderly, put forward by the former Attorney General, Dominic Grieve. And I know that, there were people in government who weren't keen on that amendment being selected because they thought that they had tabled an unamendable motion. Well, I didn't think that their motion was unamendable. And I said it isn't unamendable, and Dominic must have the opportunity to put his amendment, and of course if the government disapproves of that amendment, well, it's up to the government to encourage its colleagues to vote against that amendment. But it's not for me to act as a kind of protective wall on behalf of the executive branch. That's not the function of the Speaker. It's not the Speaker's job to be the government's friend or the opposition's friend. It's the Speaker's job to be Parliament's friend, standing up for the rights of the House. And that is what I have sought, to the best of my limited ability over the last decade, to do. Please.
Mr. Speaker, if I may call you John.
Please.
Only because I'm related to you through your wife, Sally. Well, this is true. Your mother-in-law, Eileen, and I are in regular email contact.
Okay.
And I know Uncle Terry. And also, yes, welcome. I was in London a few years ago, but with and
I'll send your best regards to my mother-in-law.
Terry.
I speak to her on a regular
We're the American
basis.
cousins. So welcome to the Big Apple.
Okay, thank you.
And give my love to my cousins across the pond. I do have a question. Last week, you delivered the annual Bingham Lecture. You talked about some of the serious, dreadful consequences if Brexit goes through. And that was in the Operation Yellowhammer documents. And that seems to indicate a series of food shortages, shortage of medical supplies, public disruption of transportation, and numerous other catastrophes. My question, is that a real, accurate, honest assessment, or is it political theater to rally the crowds? To rally the crowds against Brexit, because the consequences are serious based on jam report.
The document to which you're referring was an internal governmental assessment of what might happen in a no-deal scenario. The government must be answerable for that, and forgive me saying so, and thank you for your preface, so to speak. I didn't take a view about the merits of that prognosis, and I am not doing so. It's not for me to say. I don't think that I'm qualified to judge. I cannot be the arbiter of whether that estimate of how things would turn out is right or not. My feeling is that it plays into the debate. I mean, in a sense, what you're really asking me, I hope I'm not misrepresenting you, and I certainly don't seek to do so, do you agree that a no-deal Brexit would be bad news? Do you think that a deal Brexit would be better, or are you against Brexit altogether? And the point that I'm making is that I voted in the referendum, and I reiterate that that's a matter of established fact that I did so. But in this situation, I'm not trying to holler in support of one outcome or another. What I'm saying is that Parliament must have the opportunity to debate these matters. And where, for example, parliamentary colleagues have sought publication through what we call a humble address to Her Majesty of key papers, if Parliament passes such a proposition, then the overriding expectation is that the government of the day will comply with the express will of Parliament. I've got to stick to this ground, and I do stick to this ground, that the House will decide what it decides. Clearly, even if we come out of the European Union, which there's every possibility that we will do, our relationship with our European partners will be important. It's for you to judge whether you think on the whole Brexit is a good thing or a bad thing. What I feel is that Brexit has ultimately to be in the hands of and determined by the representative democratic bodies of the United Kingdom. That is to say, the House of Commons and the House of Lords, which are our legislature. There has been a referendum, and that's extremely important, but that doesn't mean that thereafter Parliament just gives up and takes no view on the matter. Parliament hasn't given up. Parliament is taking views on the matter, and my strong expectation is that it will continue to do so between now and the end of October, and probably for some period thereafter, because even if an agreement one way or the other or a resolution is reached on Brexit, there will be ongoing debate about the future relationship between the UK and the EU for at least the next 5 years, and more likely the next 10, and possibly the next 20. Please. Yes.
What advice do you have to your successor
I don't think my potential successors really need my advice. I suppose what I would say is always stand up for the backbenchers in Parliament, the ordinary parliamentarians. There are far more backbenchers than frontbenchers, and I think the candidates to succeed me are seized of that point, but it's important always to keep it in the forefront of one's mind. There are a lot of ordinary MPs who want to be heard, and it's at least as important, and in my view more important, that there should be time for them to be heard than perhaps for the minister or shadow minister to have a bit longer to address the House on a particular day. Insofar as I have an inclination, it is always to try to help Parliament. I am biased in favour of Parliament, 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 Parliament. Not government, not opposition, Parliament. So any scribbler gets the message. My preference is that ordinary MPs should be able to have their voices heard on behalf of their convictions and on behalf of the constituents that they're deputed to represent. That's point one, stand up for the backbencher. And secondly, I would say, keep the best and improve the rest. I think any speaker will probably feel, let's keep the best of our institution, but let's be looking always to improve it, never be satisfied, because satisfaction usually is the route to misguided pride and complacency. Don't be satisfied. Think, how can we make this place better than it is? Please. Your good self. Yeah, thank you.
There's been a lot of reporting in the New York Times and National Public Radio about how conservative austerity policies for the 8 years in between 2008 and the Brexit referendum has, may have influenced the decision to leave the EU. And I'm wondering what kind of conversation is happening right now within the Conservative Party and within Parliament in general about whether to continue austerity policies and that history, regardless of what happens with Brexit.
The short answer is, and I don't wish to be unkind or discourteous because that's an incredibly important issue, is that it just doesn't fall into my bailiwick. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're with me, it's not a matter for me at all. I mean, I'm sure these matters are being discussed, and, it's a reasonable guesstimate that the economic circumstances of the time can impact upon a public vote. That, I think, is a very fair point. There will be people who voted in the referendum purely on the matter of sovereignty or because of their view about the operation of the European single market, but there will be a lot of people who were voted in that referendum on the basis of their economic circumstances, how they thought the country was doing generally, how they were doing, how they thought the lead ministers at the time were doing. All of those would have been factors, because when you have a referendum, you can't say you can vote, but you can't vote for this reason or that reason. You have to vote for the other reason. It's open season. And whether there'll be a huge appetite in the future for regular referenda is a matter of considerable uncertainty. I'm not sure that that will be the case, but I'm sure there'll be discussions within the parties about approaches to referenda in the future. What sort of approach is necessary? Should it be a straightforward majority vote or not? What should be the electorate? Should 16 and 17-year-olds have the right to vote either in referenda or in general elections in the future? I think those things will all be writ large, but I don't really feel I can add anything to the debate about austerity. I think it's a very important debate, but I feel that it's one from which I have to steer clear. Please, the woman with the striped shirt. Yes, your good self. Thank you.
Can you explain your relationship with Black Rod?
With Black Rod?
Yeah, that was fascinating. How she walked in and let you out.
Yes, Black Rod comes from the House of Lords on the occasion of the prorogation of Parliament and at the start of the new session of Parliament, effectively to summon members of the House of Commons to the House of Lords to hear the Queen's speech, which you will understand, ladies and gentlemen, is basically the government's speech, setting out its legislative and policy priorities for the upcoming session. Now, why does it happen that way? Answer, no monarch, the Queen is up the other end on the day of the Queen's speech, no monarch comes into the chamber of the House of Commons, and that's as a result of the English Civil War, and one of my predecessors, usually regarded as the most distinguished and heroic, Speaker Lenthal, who was Speaker for 20 years in the 17th century. Charles I came into the chamber demanding to know the whereabouts of 5 MPs whom he, Charles I, wanted to arrest for treason. Speaker Lenthal said, "May it please your Majesty, I have neither eyes to see nor tongue to speak in this place, save as Parliament shall direct me, whose servant I am here," which is his roundabout circumlocutory way of saying, "On your bike, your Majesty." And so we still have this ceremony played out with Black Rod banging on the door of the chamber. And that is because it's a great British compromise. We have a Queen's speech, we have a constitutional monarchy, and I yield to none in my admiration for Her Majesty the Queen, but the Queen wouldn't come in the chamber. Black Rod comes from the House of Lords to summon us to go the other end to hear either the circumstances of prorogation of Parliament, the ending of a session, or to hear the Queen's speech at the start of the new session, which is due on October the 14th. So that's the way it happens. There are people who say, oh, that's all very fuddy-duddy and old hat and inexplicable and not comprehended. Shouldn't we ditch it? And my honest answer to that is no. I'm for keeping the best and improving the rest. I'm a modernizer. I believe in changing and improving and reforming the House of Commons. But I don't believe in getting rid of everything just because it's not understood. The challenge is to make it understood, to explain to people how we became what we are now. And so I hope I've explained to you what the relationship is. I'm happy to take a couple more, but I think Stephen might not let me.
Yeah. So I think we've run out of time.
Okay.
I think we could go on for another hour, but don't have the time. On behalf of everyone here, and on behalf of NYU's Arthur Carter Journalism Institute, we want to thank you, Mr. Speaker, for joining us.
Thank you. I say a big thank you. I'm sorry we ran out of time, but fantastic body. Fantastic. Thank you, and as you Americans would say, have a nice day. Bless you. Sorry?
It was great to hear you speak.
Bless
My name
you.
is Kaylee Wasserman. I just
Okay.
graduated from NYU this spring.
Okay, wow.
Yes, I work for Meet the Press Daily now on MSNBC, and I know that it's with Chuck Todd, and I know that he would love to have you on the show at any point to either talk about
Jackie.
Does Jackie work with you?
Jackie is my media person.
Hello,
Yeah.
my name is Kaylee Wasserman. Nice to meet you. I work with Meet the Press Daily, and I was wondering if I could give my contact to you guys.
Thank you, Steve. Is it something that would have to be done from the US, or could it be done from London? Yeah.
Really anytime. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Speaker, are you going to be in New York for the rest of the day? Or are you,
I'm going to Boston.
I'm Rick Lash. I'm from the New York Times.
Thank you very much. I'm off to Boston. But thank you. Thank you.
I missed the first part of your speech. Did you say anything about whether you're on speaking terms with the Prime Minister?
Thank you very much indeed. I said what I said.
It's a delight to see you. I'm sorry if you weren't here. I was trying to make a serious speech rather than sort of comments on individual personalities, but thank you.
Can I get a quick picture with you?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, of course you can, Stephen. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, this isn't ours. It's journalism, so I don't know who this goes to.